I don't think we can see anybody in the crowd standing there, so maybe I'll jump in quick. My colleague to the left here commented on the term data, and that's near and dear to my heart, because I think as an administrator, I'm always looking for data to be able to prove the value of the library in order to argue for the funding for it. And recently I had the opportunity to hear to meet with the author of Overschooled but Undereducated, and I'm embarrassed to say this in a room full of librarians, but I can't remember his name. But what he said is that you need to prove data for any public institution, and a great example he gave is he talked about a community of 100,000 people somewhere in the States, I'm not sure where it was, and they had about a 50% completion rate. 50% of grade 12 students were completing, and so as a community they felt that they needed to fix that problem. And they brought in a new superintendent. The superintendent spent a year, and happy to say he actually worked with the local library doing so, and tried to understand, well, what was the real vision of the community? And what they realized is what the community needed for educational outputs from their students could be done in a completely different, radical way, to use your term. And so what happened is they changed the curriculum, and as a result, the students had a 100% completion rate of their grade 12 curriculum by the end of grade 10. And so they realized, well, we've got 2 extra years in our hands, what do we do with them? And so the library, the director of the library and the superintendent started doing these community consultation projects and having incubation periods, they actually called them, so it fits nice with what was said. And they realized what they could do with those students is they could send them out into the community to work in chosen areas for 3.5 days a week, and then they'd come back and report on it the other day and a half. And he told this fabulous story of this young lady who, in her 3.5 days, worked on a maternity ward, and she was so good at it, they actually gave her a beeper, so in her day and a half, if something interesting happened, she could run back to the hospital and see what was happening there. But it just got my mind thinking about what a library can really be in terms of an incubator, and how they were able to demonstrate the value of the library through the increased retention rates, which goes back to your comment about tying to the vision of the community. And I was wondering if you had other examples like that of libraries that are really tied to the vision of the community and can demonstrate it in a real concrete way.
I have nothing as good as a beeper to the maternity ward. That's a brilliant one. You know, I look at examples such as the. I have one. It's an over-the-top one, and it's actually in the Expect More book, and it's about what happened in Alexandria during Egypt during the last rise up when Mubarak was taken out of power, which for all we know we're watching a repeat of. And the community that was tearing down government buildings upon government buildings, and they then looked to the library, which was a government building built very specifically by Mubarak as a sort of symbol of his power, and they were going to go tear it down until protesters surrounded the area, surrounded the library, hand in hand, men, women, and children, to prevent it. And by the end of the whole thing, not one rock had been thrown against the wall, not one window was broken. And when people talk about it, they say, well, you know, those were extraordinary librarians. Those were extraordinary librarians. And I say, no, they weren't. They were brilliant. They're amazing librarians, but they weren't extraordinary. You know what they did to earn that community trust over 5 years? They did their job. They went in every day and they did what they were told to do, which was to serve the public. They organized materials, they organized tours, they organized education, and over time the community learned that their job was so important to them that they didn't want to mess it up. I have examples of where, you know, I mentioned a few. Chattanooga is working with their broadband initiative to make sure that there's value in putting those wires in. In Vermont, in Delaware, their broadband initiative is building large-scale training facilities, so they're teaming up between the Delaware libraries and the State Department of Education to provide adult education. One of the things that they have is, when you look at completion rates for education 20 and below, they're actually not that bad. But when you look at 20 and above, those who never finished their K-12 education in the state, primary and secondary education, they're never going to finish it. And so they're building specific initiatives where they have training centers to incent folks to come in and essence finish their post-secondary education or their secondary education. And so they wanted to do it within the library because the schools are involved in the curriculum, the state is involved in the funding and providing some of that training, but the library was the place that these folks already were continuing their education informally. So in a large structural way, you see the library as institution at the state level, at the city level, being a good partner. And the way that they're a good partner is they identify the number one needs of that community and they say this is how we can fulfill them, as opposed to saying, well, we're the library, we're going to do it this way. Any place you see a brilliant library, you see a progressive city government that's working hand in hand with them on because they've talked to their constituency. You mentioned data. I'm not a huge fan of data. I'm much more about knowledge. Data is numbers, right? I want it that makes sense, and I know that's what we mean, is using data to make sense of what's going on. In Philadelphia, they implemented a system called CityStat, where they took all the statistics of crime statistics, all the housing statistics, all of the welfare statistics, and all the library statistics, mapped it out geographically, and they could find out, for example, there's lower crime rates. There are two places where you get lower crime rates. One is around a police station, imagine, and the other is around a library. And they said, this is an interesting thing. Why is that? And they could go in and look at it and say, do we need to build more branch libraries, or do we need to build other sort of community centers going on? In Philadelphia, when they lowered their budget, they were going to decimate their community centers. They looked to libraries to provide after-school activities for children after 3 o'clock so they wouldn't get involved in gang activities and such, and the library could pick up that kind of education activity. That's the kind of hand-in-hand activity. No library alone in a city or in a university or in a school can make that place better. I need to say that really clearly. No public library on their own can make a city better. It is only in conjunction with the city government, with the nonprofit institutions, with the businesses, and obviously with the citizens of that community. Same thing for an academic institution in the city. We are facilitators of people's dreams. We are not imposers or inventors of those dreams. So, I'm sorry, I'm completely off track now. I'm sorry.
David?
Yes, hello.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Morgan Pelche from the Fort St. John Public Library. Actually, this gentleman just sort of alluded or segued into it for me, so that's handy. In Fort St. John, we have a new, very innovative secondary campus called the Energetic Learning Campus, a partnership between our city and school district number 60. The entire campus was built around the concept of project-based learning, which is really big, obviously, in education right now. The classrooms don't have walls, and the kids, all their chairs have wheels, and it's very, very fun. But it's also in an arena, which is fun. But what I'm wondering is just a lot of what David was saying, and what Ken was saying yesterday, it seemed that the vision that we're looking for the library community in general is really in step with the principles of project-based learning, a lot of creation and collaboration and community critiquing. So my question is if either David or anyone else on this panel, if you are aware of any communities in which public libraries or other academic libraries are already in a really active collaboration with school districts to help facilitate the project-based learning model with the secondary students, and then of course to actually carry it into real life, because what these visions of these wonderful libraries sound like is something that, well, it sounds like what the school districts are actually trying to foster in the kids right now. So are you aware of any specific communities in which the public libraries are trying to pick up where the schools have left off and are doing that very successfully right now?
First of all, I have to say I love the arena in a school idea. 2 enter, 1 leave. It could be fun. I can't talk about specific relationships between school districts and public. I wish I could. I know some very good school librarians that work with their public libraries, but a lot of times it's very informal basis. And in the United States, at least, there are a huge number of structural barriers that are oftentimes put in place, which are problematic. However, I can say that one story, Ann Arbor Public Library, which is in Denver, or sorry, in outside of Detroit in Michigan, they have production librarians. And originally, these were techie librarians that helped build the new cataloging system. And then after they were done with the cataloging system, they had all this expertise on staff. They said, what are we going to do with it? And the answer was, they're available. So as the community comes in and says, I've got a product to work on, I've got an idea, they are assigned a production librarian that helps them produce it, whether it's a local history, whether it's a web page, whether it's a genealogy, what have you. And I love that idea of having production librarians on staff ready to work with them. So I'll turn back to the panel who might have some better examples of school libraries and public libraries working.